Chapter 11, Parenting, More Choices and Constraints. Parenthood has its rewards and its challenges. Usually our expectations of what parenting is like is often not the reality. So in this chapter, we'll go over some child development theories, our parenting roles, parenting styles and discipline, parenting across the life course, and then how children cope with current social issues. And here in this table, you'll see the yearly cost of raising a child under the age of 2. The 2015 numbers, middle-income married couples. You can see it's a very expensive proposition. Life changes dramatically when one becomes a parent. Even before the baby or child arrives, preparations begin. Women who are pregnant make lifestyle changes to their diet. They add vitamin supplements, and take birthing classes, baby-proofing their houses, and so forth. Planning the nursery, buying clothes. So again, things definitely change and alter in the preparation of bringing a child into the family. The transition to parenthood is often very abrupt. There is little anticipatory socialization for the role, and babies play an active part in their own development. They teach parents to meet their needs. People typically internalize their parental roles rather than just perform the role. So becoming a mother or a father becomes a part of a person's self-identity. As they transition to parenthood, partners help each other learn the role of being a parent. Parenting does not come naturally. It is not instinctive, nor is it innate. Much advice is given, but for the most part, we get through by trial and error. Babies don't leave the hospital with an instruction manual. There are benefits and costs to raising children. Media accounts often focus on the difficulties, but parenthood can also bring happiness. Now, parenting doesn't always bring happiness, but many parents report that having children has enhanced their sense of well-being. Parents, compared to non-parents, report they are generally more positive and happy about their lives. They are happier when taking care of children than doing any other daily activity like cooking or watching TV. We learned early in the semester that roles are a set of expected behavior patterns, obligations, and privileges. And in these various roles, we experience role overload, role conflict, and role strain. So the rewards of having children is an enhanced sense of well-being and happiness, but the difficulties come in the form of these different roles. So first, role overload. Role overload is something that working parents experience when they feel overwhelmed by multiple commitments, like trying to juggle work and family. Role conflict is closely related to role overload, and it's when a person experiences frustrations to uncertainty, when expectations of 2 or more roles are incompatible. As a parent, you feel role conflict when you can't make school activities because of work obligations. Role strain is conflict that one feels within a role. When a parent tries to meet the needs of more than one child and has competing interests and activities. And then there are 4 factors of role strain. First, unrealistic expectations. That parents expect and are expected to succeed with every child, and they feel guilty if they fail. Our culture measures the success of parents by the way the child turns out. Secondly, decreased authority. Many parents believe that they have less authority in raising kids than parents did in the past. Third, increased responsibility. Parents, rather than children, are often held accountable for a child's misbehavior. If the child runs away, for example, professionals assume that children don't run away from good homes and that there's something wrong with the parents. And lastly, high parenting standards. Parents parents are now expected to live up to high standards as compared to previous generations, like being informed about the latest technologies, watching children for early signs of physical or mental abnormalities, and consulting specialists immediately if they detect learning problems. Yet we receive no training for this parenting role. Ultimately, parents are accused of not taking charge of their children. And as reality sets in, frustration increases because it's not what we expected. First, let's look at motherhood, ideal versus realistic roles. First-time mothers often face enormous pressures. The myth that mothering comes naturally. This myth creates three problems. One, it assumes that a good mother will be perfect if she follows her instincts. Two, it implies that there is something wrong with a mother who doesn't spend all of her time in child rearing. And three, it discourages the involvement of other adults, fathers in particular. The fact is, mothers tend to be worn out by broken sleep, worries about splitting time between work and child rearing, and what to do about child care. Images of celebrity mothers paint a very different picture than the typical mother. Author Elizabeth Badminter writes that realities of motherhood are hidden by a halo of illusion. She says that future mothers fantasize about love and happiness and fail to see the frustrations, the exhaustion, the loneliness, even depression and guilt. The transition to motherhood is linked to a decline in marital satisfaction, mostly because before childbirth, they expect that the child care and increased housework would be shared and equal. 62% of working mothers have a child less than 6 years old. Mothers with full-time jobs spend 15 hours a week in child care. Fathers, less than 10 hours a week. So working mothers are even more likely to be dissatisfied and become stressed if their partner's not doing their share of child care. Researchers refer to women's higher child care hours as maternal gatekeeping, or a mother's behavior that either encourages or discourages a father's involvement in family matters, especially parenting infants and young children. This can be conscious or unconscious, but researchers believe it is usually associated with negative behaviors. For example, mothers might redo a diaper or change the baby's outfit because the father doesn't, do it correctly, or the father doesn't burp the baby after feeding. Those sorts of things. Negative gatekeepers result in fathers doing less housework and childcare. Some fathers will act unable to do the task. They'll pretend they can't do it just to encourage that maternal gatekeeping, just to get out of changing the diapers. Fathers also experience role overload, strain, and conflict. Fathers find being a dad not as easy as they expected. Negative emotions are normal, but we rarely hear about them, regardless of how much fathers love their infants and children. Like women, men romanticize the view of parenthood that the media feeds us about fathers, holding a peaceful and happy sleeping baby. Father's involvement in child care and the better his adjustment to the new role of fatherhood and his relationship with the mother. So the quality of the relationship with a partner affects their parenting. Fathers may also experience postpartum depression. So their involvement, again, with that child care, the better their adjustment to the new role and to the relationship with their partner. Here we have a working father, actual football player that used to think his career could not be complete without at least a Pro Bowl appearance. But then he had 4 children, and he's enjoying being a father. Here we have a cost of raising a child calculator. It was a link to a calculator, but the link is not working. And if you would like to try this calculator out, you need to check out USDA.com. They have the cost of raising a child calculator, U.S. Department of Agriculture. Social scientists consider a number of theories to help explain child development. And we're going to look at three perspectives. George Herbert Mead's theory of the self. He focused on social interaction and development. Jean Piaget's cognitive development theory, where he focuses on the ability to think, reason, analyze, and apply information. And Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory of development, which focuses on elements of psychological, sociological perspectives from childhood to adulthood. Also going to touch on Bronfenbrenner's bioecological theory of development. First, Mead's theory of the self. Mead was a symbolic interactionist, and he viewed the self as the basis of human development that comes from social interaction and not from biology. Mead saw the newborn as a blank slate, and that through the interactions with those around him or her, we begin to develop the necessary attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors to fit into society. The child first learns through imitating the words and behavior of significant others. Significant others are the people who are important in one's life, like parents and other primary caregivers and siblings. As the child grows, he or she begins to understand the role of the generalized other, people who don't have close ties to the child, but they influence the child's internalization of society's norms and roles. Once the child has learned the significance of roles, what their role is in relation to others, according to Mead, the child has learned to respond to the expectations of society. So Mead's stages of the self in this theory of the self. First is stage 1, and this is called the imitation stage, approximately birth to about age 2. In this stage, the infant does really not distinguish between the self and others. So the infant's learning behavior by mimicking or imitating the significant others, their parents, their siblings, their teachers and peers. Stage 2 is called the play stage, and this is from around age 2 to age 6 years old. Children are beginning to use language. They continue to interact with significant others, and they can distinguish between the self and other. And through play, the child learns social norms, like how to behave in certain ways. In pretend play, they begin to understand roles like teacher and doctor and police and fireman, and they start to play these games and act out these roles in their play. Stage 3 is called the games stage. This is around approximately 6 years old and older. As the child grows and interacts with more people, they learn to respond to and fulfill social roles. They can understand how others, the generalized other, might react if they behave a certain way. So they learn to play multiple roles, and they can participate in organized activities with the generalized other. So, here's, gameplay, and if you think about a board game and, with multiple players and knowing what your role is and, strategizing, if I do this, what reaction will I get from another player? So that's the idea. Next, we have Piaget's cognitive development theory. Now, Piaget was interested in the growing child's efforts to understand his or her world, to learn how to adapt to their world, and to develop an independent identity. So his theory has 4 major developmental stages. The first stage is the sensory motor stage, which is about birth to age 2. So through their senses, touch, sight, taste, hearing, and smell, the child can differentiate themselves from their environment. The second stage is the pre-operational stage, around 2 to 7 years. And here the child learns to use symbols and language, and it can express thoughts, but still very self-centered. They still have difficulty seeing things from another's viewpoint. And next we have the concrete operational stage from about 8 to 12 years old. Children learn cause and effect, so they can anticipate consequences or possible consequences without trying it out. They begin to understand the views and perspectives of another person. And in 4, the formal operational stage, age 13 and older, this is when we get to adolescence, children can really start to think and reason in abstract terms and concepts. Really think about the past, the present, and the future. Which is hard concepts to kind of, as a child, at this stage is really the understanding starts to set in. They can understand future consequences and evaluate, the probable outcomes of several alternatives. If I do this, then this will happen. If I do that, then that will happen. They can evaluate their own thoughts and consider philosophical issues. If X, then why not Y? Now, Piaget believed that children play an active role in learning, processing information, and seeking knowledge. According to him, children must pass through the same 4 stages at similar ages and in order. And once they have mastered them, they can move on. Mastered the stage, they can move on to the next. Next, we have Erikson's psychosocial theory of development. Erikson's theory covers the entire lifespan. It includes 8 stages. Each stage, a person must face a specific challenge or crises, and that presents itself, presents tasks and risks. The outcome of each of these crises determines whether you move on successfully to the next stage. Resolving the crisis is the responsibility of the individual, but successful development comes from the person's social relationships with family members, peers, and others. So here we have Erikson's 8 stages. In stage 1, it's trust versus mistrust, and this is from birth to 1 year. So the task is to develop basic trust in oneself and others. The risk is a sense of abandonment, which may lead to mistrust and a lack of self-confidence. Stage 2 is autonomy versus shame or doubt. Age 2 to 3. The task is to learn self-control and independence. The risk is that parental shaming to control the child may lead to self-doubt. Stage 3, initiative versus guilt, from age 4 to 5. The task is to learn new tasks and to pursue goals aggressively. The risk is feeling guilty for having been too aggressive or attempted forbidden activities. Stage 4, industry versus inferiority, age 6 to 12. The task is to develop an interest in productive work rather than just play. The risk is failure or fear of failure that may result in feelings of inferiority. Stage 4, identity versus identity confusion, age 13 to 19. The task is to achieve a sense of individuality and of having a place in society, being true to yourself. The risk, making important decisions, may lead to confusion over who and what one wants to become. Stage 6, intimacy versus isolation, age 20 to 30. The task is to achieve close ties with others and fulfill commitments. The risk is the inability to take chances by sharing intimacy, which may result in avoiding others or in isolation. Generativity versus self-absorption. The task here from age 31 to 64 is to establish and guide the next generation, especially one's children, to create ideas and products. The risk is the inability to bear children or create ideas or products that may lead to stagnation. The last stage, integrity versus despair, age 65 and older. The task here is to feel a sense of satisfaction and dignity in what one has achieved. The risk is disappointments and unrealized goals, which may lead to feelings of alienation or despair. Now, these three theories point out that children grow and mature by learning to deal with changes and new expectations. Children who feel loved and secure have a good chance of developing into happy, productive members of society, one of the family's major socialization functions. And I also wanted to bring in Bronfenbrenner's bioecological theory of development, which posits that children's characteristics and their environments interact in shaping their development. So, for example, interaction of your physiological tendencies, example, getting upset easily and you can't calm down, your personality, your environment. So he was instrumental in starting the Head Start program. Next, we'll talk about how parenting styles and discipline affect children and how they feel about themselves. Parenting styles make a big difference in how a child turns out. It is our parenting styles is it is a general approach to interacting with and disciplining children. Psychologist Diana Baumrind identified 4 parenting styles, and these are based on 2 dimensions. We have support, the one dimension, or the amount of affection, acceptance, warmth, and caring that a parent provides the child. We call this the parent's responsiveness. And then the second dimension is control, which is the degree of flexibility a parent shows in guiding a child's behavior. Their demandingness, so the parent's demandingness versus their responsiveness. So the 4 stages are authoritarian, permissive, authoritative, and uninvolved. In the authoritarian style, the first style, parenting that is very demanding, very rigid and punitive. In this style, parents expect obedience from their children, often using force to control their behaviors. The child is expected to accept parental authority without question. Authoritarian parents show little warmth and support to their children. These parents may be experiencing stress and depression, increasing the likelihood of being more punitive. Children from these homes are irritable, belligerent, and hyperactive. The second style is permissive parenting. And in this style, parents are usually warm and responsive, but not demanding. They place few demands on children, and instead of setting boundaries, they are very indulgent. Adolescents raised in lenient households are often less mature, less responsible, and less able to take leadership positions as adults. They're also more likely to be rebellious, impulsive, and to have behavior problems. The authoritative parenting style. Now, these parents are demanding. They impose rules and standards of behavior, but they're also very responsive and supportive. Parents encourage autonomy and self-reliance. They tend to use positive reinforcement instead of harsh punishment. And they encourage verbal give and take and believe that the child has rights. The authoritative parent expects obedience, but they're open to discussing and changing the rules. This style is the most likely to produce self-reliant, achievement-oriented, successful children. The uninvolved parenting style is where parents are indifferent. They are neither supportive nor demanding. They spend little time interacting with their children, and they can also be rejecting and know little about their children's whereabouts. They often ignore their children. Children in these homes are immature, withdrawn, or underachieving. So which parenting style is the most effective? The authoritative. These children have better, research shows they have better psychosocial development, higher school grades, and are less likely to be influenced by peer pressure. The authoritarian, permissive, and authoritative styles often overlap. Parents may use a combination. Parenting styles often also reflect cultural values. For example, Latino and Asian immigrants tend to be authoritarian, and this tends to produce positive outcomes, higher grades, less crime and drugs. Most American studies emphasize participation of both parents, yet some cultures, fathers play a limited role. So here in this table, we have examples of the 4 common parenting styles and show where the parental support is high or low, or where the parental control is high or low. Now, we are not born with self-control. Therefore, we must learn discipline. And many parents believe that both verbal and corporal punishment are appropriate forms of discipline. According to a national study, most parents in all socioeconomic groups used verbal and psychological aggression to control or change their children's behavior. 50% yelled, screamed, and shouted at infants and 1-year-old children. 90% did to their 4 to 17-year-olds. About 33% swore at their children. 17% admitted to calling them names like dumb or lazy. About 20% threatened at least once to kick the child out of the house. Now, many parents don't want to admit that they abuse their children verbally, and many parents don't remember all the times that they do it. When it comes to corporal punishment, in 2007, 94% of American parents hit their preschool children to correct misbehavior. It could be higher due to non-reporting. 35% report slapping, or slapping a hand or a leg, pinching, shaking, hitting with a hand, belt, or paddle, or slapping the infant's face. Physical punishment tends to be more common among low-income parents, those with less than a high school education, parents in the South, boys, particularly firstborn, mothers who experienced physical abuse themselves as children, and unmarried mothers, especially under the age of 33. And mothers who move in with their romantic partners are more likely to spank their children than those who live only with their children. So does it work? There is evidence. Doctors have reported, with the American Academy of Pediatrics, that physical punishment may stop the behavior in the short term, but then has long-term negative outcomes. So experts recommend non-physical forms of punishment. Remove temptations. Make rules simple. Be consistent. Set a good example and discipline with love and patience. So what's a parent to do? Effective discipline involves more than rewards and punishment. According to experts, children need 3 types of inner resources to become responsive adults: positive feelings about themselves and others, an understanding of right and wrong, and alternatives for solving problems. We need to give our children the tools to do this. Understanding the changes that take place over the life course can really help improve family relationships, because raising children from infancy to adulthood requires numerous adjustments over time. The period between birth and 18 months is a period of extreme helplessness, but also tremendous physical and cognitive growth. Myths create unnecessary anxiety and guilt for many parents because they have false expectations or unrealistic goals. So here's some myths about babies. Myth number 1. You can tell in infancy how bright a child is likely to be later in life. The fact is, early achievements, reaching, sitting, crawling, or talking, are rarely good indicators of intelligence. Myth number 2, the more stimulation a baby gets, the better. Fact is, babies can be overstimulated, agitated, and even frightened. The senses, in a sense, can be overloaded. Myth number 3, parents who pick up crying babies will spoil them. I heard this one quite often. Fact is, it is impossible to spoil a child less than 1 year old. Crying is the only way a baby can tell they are hungry, wet, soiled, or even sick. So parents should pick up their baby as much as they want and not worry about discipline at such an age. Myth number 4, special talents surface early or not at all. Fact is, many gifted children don't recognize or develop their skill until adolescence or later. And myth number 5, parental conflicts don't affect babies. The fact is, babies as young as 1 year old understand the facial expressions and voice tones of people around them. Parental arguing and yelling can affect a baby. And here's a hot topic, bed sharing. Bed sharing is when an infant or a child sleep in the same bed as a parent. And this is common in much of the world, but controversial here in the United States. Some groups and pediatricians say that bed sharing is good for bonding, easier feeding, nighttime feedings, and everyone gets a good night's sleep. So these would be some of the advantages, promoting parental-infant bonding. The American Academy of Pediatrics, however, discourages bed sharing because it can cause accidental deaths. Babies can fall out of bed. They can get wedged in the cushions, in the mattress, against a wall, or smothered by a pillow. Parents can roll on top of their baby. So there's a lot of evidence to show that this can often even be quite dangerous. Also, sudden infant death syndrome increases when parents bed share. Can still be bed sharing at an older ages if you don't break the child of bed sharing early on because of nightmare, severe weather, attention, just wanting to come and get that attention. They do make beds for cradles, I guess they're called, that could be next to a parent's bed while the child is very young, an infant, until they grow older and get moved into their own rooms. Definitely a controversial issue here, but it's very common in other cultures. Crying can increase a parent's anxiety, so learning how to respond, understand the cries, bonding, and can help reduce frustration and distress. Parenting children. When it comes to parenting children, the quality of relationship with adults and other caregivers has an effect on this development. Daily interaction, engaging infants in talk from birth increases their vocabulary. In fact, many pediatricians encourage reading to a child even before they can understand and use language. Having the words, hearing the words, and language to express themselves can reduce frustration. So by hearing these at an early age, it can help reduce a lot of frustration. Parents and children's inputs. Parents shape a child's environment, but each baby has its own genes, physical appearance, temperament, personality. Some children are easier to soothe and are happier. Others are more cautious and shy. Others can be difficult to please, and some constantly dissatisfied. Strong-willed children, you hear them described as. So even within the same family, children's personalities and behavior can be quite different. Now, is childhood too medicalized? In 1952, the American Psychiatric Association published the DSM of mental disorders, which describes mental health disorders for both children and adults. Now, the number of disorders increased from 106 in 1952 to more than 300 in 2013, especially for children. So this tripled this number. In sociology, we call this medicalization. And so the DSM's changing labels and diagnoses is an example of this medicalization. The process that defines a non-medical condition or behavior as an illness, disorder, or disease requiring medical treatment. So for example, children with attention and behavior problems are now defined and treated with drugs for ADHD. Because of the growth of this medicalization, physicians and parents are increasingly over-medicating children. Now, there are instances where much of this medication is very beneficial, so you have to weigh out the costs and benefits. The benefits, the physicians, pharmacists, pharmaceutical companies, also parents all need to be on board and understanding when, especially when something is medicalized. So are children overscheduled? That's another question. Psychologist David Elkind criticizes the busy lives of children and holds parents accountable for pushing children to grow up too fast. Children have lost 12 hours of free time a week in the last 2 decades. Organized and more sedentary activities have replaced free play. According to Elkin, these affects it affects their imagination, their curiosity, their creativity, and their interaction with peers. Others argue, though, that it's exaggerated, stating that structured activities increase a child's self-confidence, provide them with those interpersonal interactions. Only 6% of American adolescents spend more than 20 hours a week on highly organized activities. These organized activities are exciting and enjoyable. They offer new skills like learning a sport. They provide opportunities to interact with both peers and other adults. And they decrease the likelihood of engaging in unhealthy behaviors like smoking or drinking or using drugs. Adolescents go through many changes, and teens are establishing at this time their own identity. They're testing their autonomy and breaking away from parental supervision. But changes do occur in that parent-child relationship. In adolescence, good parent-child relationships may suddenly shift. As teens turn to their peers more and become more independent, parents often feel rejected and suspicious. Scientists believe that there is a link between teens' behavior and the fact that his or her brain may be still changing. The brain is maturing at very different rates. The parts of the brain that control impulses, avoiding risky behavior, and planning ahead are the last parts of the brain to mature. Helicopter parents and problem parents. Parental involvement is good for a child's development. Being over-involved is not so good. Helicopter parents are parents who hover over their kids, are super involved, intrusive, and over-controlling. It diminishes teenagers and a young adult's ability to develop decision-making and problem-solving skills. So these parents end up increasing their own stress and decrease their children's feelings of competence and autonomy. And there's a new app that many parents are using. Myself, I'm guilty of Life 360, which is a way to kind of keep track and know where your children are at many different times. And so there's been some articles put out about how much that invades a young person's privacy. Problem parents are parents who, by their actions, increase their teenage children's risk of engaging in this unhealthy type of behavior. They're a big part of why so many teens may smoke, drink, get into abusive, illegal drugs. So you want to set a good example, and teens will be much more influenced by what their parents do than by what they tell them to do. Being a good role model is good for teens. There are some recent trends in and what we're calling, the parenting in the crowded nest as opposed to the crowded empty nest. During the 1960s and 70s, the term empty nest was used to describe families with parents in their 50s whose children have either gone to college, gotten married, found jobs, and moved out, leaving them with an empty nest. Today, young adults are living at home longer. So the term boomerang children and the boomerang generation is used to refer to the young adults moving back in with their parents. But now, people in their 30s, 40s, and older, with a spouse sometimes, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, and children, are moving back home. Now, some have called this generation adultolescents, but the proportion of 25 to 34-year-olds who are living with parents have increased from 9% in 1960 to nearly 30% in 2011. Among young adults aged 18 to 34, men are more likely than women to live with their parent. And this is not unique to America. Other countries have this going on as well. So why are many adult children living at home? Well, there are some macro factors that explain this. Individual and macro factors explain why many Americans delay transitioning to adulthood and living independently. Women move back with parents who support them financially and wait on them. It's a good lifestyle. The Great Recession was a major reason adult children live with their parents. In 2011, almost 40% of young adults aged 18 to 34 either live with their parents or move back because of the economy. Declining employment, financial insecurity, student loan debt, low wages, divorce, credit card debt, and moving from job to job has made it difficult for young middle-class adults. So we're witnessing a change in attitudes in this phenomena of young adults still living at home. So what happens to the relationship between parents and boomerang children? This is the percent of young adults living at home with their parents and their ages. More men than women. These are the family dynamics. So in this figure, we see 18 to 34-year-olds living with their parents who describe their child-parent relationship as good, bad, or no difference. Now, 47% said there was no difference. 18% said bad, and 34% said good. Some parents say they tolerate but are unhappy that their children live under the same roof. There's some conflict about things, whether or not, they're helping out, using the family car, and taking care of their own personal belongings. On the positive, 18% of 18 to 34-year-olds say that living at home or moving back was bad for their relationship with their parent. And based on a recent survey of parents who were 47 to 66, and whose adult children live with them, 53% said that doing so was better than their children struggling on their own. A small percent are saying it's bad, majority are saying it's good, and some are saying really no difference. Let's talk about parenting in later life. The number of multi-generational households that include parents, adult children aged 25 and older, and grandchildren has increased. It really has doubled. It doubled from 11% in 1980 to 22% in 2010. If adult children help pay for some of the household expenses and participate in good parental relationship, they also must take responsibility for taking over some of the physical demands and care for their aging parents who get sick or need assistance. So the relationship generally will improve. In the United States, some of the parents often face mixed outcomes in the adult-child relationship. Adult children who receive parental financial and emotional support are happier than those who don't receive that kind of support. However, parents often experience stress, and often the adult children are doing poorly and have to rely on the parents for financial and emotional support. Now we'll talk about some current social issues and children's well-being. Now we will take a look at some of these things and the effect of electronic media, in particular, some risks that children face, and also mention foster care. We're definitely in the age of computer technology, whether we like it or not. And the fact is, it also affects how we parent our children. From babies, toddlers, and preschoolers, there are 1,000 apps targeted specifically to this age group. Music, counting, the alphabet, stories, flashcards. There's a lot of educational opportunities that many parents are convinced are beneficial to learning. And I think a lot of parents under this pandemic are really experiencing, with homeschooling, this opportunity to use those learning technologies. Most pediatricians, however, say that such electronic devices are not educational. They're just amusement. They would be just like a TV. When children are staring at screens, they're not really interacting with people around them. So they don't use language appropriately. They don't experience the world through exploration and play, and that's the main concern. When it comes to school-age children, 80% of the smartphone and tablet apps did not offer information about their privacy, and most, if they did, were very long and complicated. So privacy is still very much an issue with those devices. In addition, 60% of children's apps share information and personal data, the username, email address, a friends list, and geographic locations. So there's definitely concerns, especially, again, the internet and teens. Use of the internet has definitely changed. The use of digital mobile communication is a daily part of life. A small percent say the internet makes them feel depressed and less outgoing, but 52% believe that social media has improved their relationships with friends. Social networking, again, has been a part of that description. Parents are unsure about the impact of electronic media. What is that impact that it has on their children? 81% are concerned about information that advertisers can learn about their children online. 72% of parents are worried about their teens interacting with people they don't know. And 69% worry that online activity will have a negative effect on children's reputation, their future academic, or even their employment possibilities. Yet even with these concerns, only 31% of parents help their children set up privacy settings for their social networking. Parents are also stating that they're concerned with cyberbullying, which is the willful and repeated harm using computers, cell phones, and other electronic devices. Cyberbullying is most common in the teen years, but starts before age 12. 32% of teens have experienced some type of online harassment. Parents are also some of the biggest abusers of online usage. 40% of parents admit that their mobile devices have distracted them from playing with their children. And 41% of teens report that their parents read or send email and text all the time. Compared with figures from the year 2000, today children are smoking and drinking less, graduating from high school in large numbers, are less likely to be exposed to secondhand smoke at home, and less likely to die of motor vehicle injuries. So, although life appears to be improving for many American children, there is also some bad news. Approximately 36% of children and adolescents are obese. And between 1991 and 2007, the number of incarcerated parents with children under age 18 increased by almost 80%. About 67% of children live in highly polluted areas. And the U.S. has the highest child poverty rates and the worst record in protecting children against gun violence among all industrialized countries. According to the Adoption and Foster Care Analysis and Reporting System, as of fiscal year 2014, there were an estimated 415,129 children in foster care. Now, these numbers have decreased by about 20% since 2005. Foster homes are supposed to provide short-term care until children can either be adopted or returned to their biological parents. The main benefit to foster care is to allow children to experience physical and emotional and an emotional safe environment. Children find themselves in foster care due to poverty, child abuse, and parental neglect. Foster homes are adults who raise children who aren't their own. These may include non-relatives, but also relatives and in institutions and group homes. Many children wait up to 5 years to be adopted. They go through multiple placements and remain in foster care until late adolescence. 11% are in the care less than a month. 35% are in that care up to a year. The median amount of time spent was 13.3 months in 2014. Although it varies by city and state, between 36 and 52% of older youth run away at least once, and nearly 2/3 do so multiple times. These youth typically run to be with family or friends, like a boyfriend or a girlfriend. They're usually not trying to escape abuse or neglect, which is a concern. And of the teenagers who age out of the foster care system when they turn 18, about half don't complete high school, about 1/3 are arrested, and many are homeless. The preferred goal is to really reunite children with their parents. Of the children who exited foster care in 2014, a little over half were reunited with their parents, but 21% were adopted. So there have been many changes in child rearing. More fathers are involved, for example, raising their children, and more mothers are working. But there are more at-risk children and the need for quality child care and daycare. We learned that social class shapes our choices and that the current economic conditions can really place constraints on parents.